They called them slaves, mindless labor dragged from foreign lands, whipped under the desert sun, building monuments to tyrants. Hollywood showed you chains and blood. History books repeated the same tired lie for 2,000 years. Then, in 2013, archaeologist Pierre Tallet split open limestone caves at Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea coast and found papyrus scrolls that ripped apart everything we thought we knew about who built the Great Pyramid, the oldest known papyrus in Egypt, 4,500 years old, written by a man named Merer, not a pharaoh, not a priest, an inspector, a middle-ranking official. And his words changed the entire story. The scale makes you think impossible. The precision makes you think alien. But the real story is more shocking than fiction, because the engineers who built this were not what we imagined. Not slaves, not mystics, not extraterrestrials beaming down technology. They were paid workers, skilled craftsmen, organized into teams with names, fed meat every single day, given medical care, buried with honor, and they left receipts. March 24th, 2013. Tallet and his team cleared a passageway between two massive stone blocks sealing boat storage caves at Wadi al-Jarf. Inside, they found entire papyrus scrolls, some tied with rope, exactly as they were thrown in 4,500 years ago when the port closed. These were not religious texts, not royal proclamations. They were logbooks, day-by-day accounts of one man's work crew during the 27th year of Pharaoh Khufu's reign, around 2570 BCE, when the Great Pyramid was nearly complete and workers were fitting the final white limestone casing from Tura quarries. They transported limestone blocks from Tura North Quarry across the Nile to a place Merer calls Rocher Khufu, the entrance to the Pool of Khufu, an artificial harbor at the base of the Giza Plateau. His papyrus records it all. Day 1. The director casts for Heliopolis in a transport boat to bring food while the elite is in Tura. Day 2. Inspector Merer spends the day with his troop hauling stones in Tura North, spending the night at Tura North. Day after day. Precise, methodical, professional. But Herodotus was writing 2,000 years after construction, and everyone assumed he was guessing or exaggerating. Merer proves Herodotus was right. Archaeological Studies Journal Memoirs, published by IFAO Cairo, the peer-reviewed article by Tallet and Gregory Merward in Near Eastern Archaeology, Volume 77 from 2014, Mark Leonard's 3 decades of excavation data published through Ancient Egypt Research Associates, and the Wadi al-Jarf papyri translations available through the University of Paris Sorbonne Archaeological Mission Reports. These are not popular history summaries. These are primary archaeological sources, excavation reports with coordinates and stratigraphy, papyrus translations with hieratic script analysis. Now back to the information. The first definitive person identified as managing pyramid construction operations. Not some nameless overseer cracking whips. A member of the royal family coordinating logistics for the final phase of his brother's eternal monument. When archaeologists cross-referenced Merer's diary with physical evidence at Giza, the correspondence was exact. Mark Leonard, who has led excavations at Giza for over 30 years through Ancient Egypt research, associates detected through test excavations in the late 1980s and early 1990s the outline of an artificial basin matching Merer's Shey Akhet Khufu, the lake of the horizon of Khufu. Massive enough for boats like Merer's carrying multi-ton limestone blocks to sail right to the pyramid's base. The western edge was Khufu's Valley Temple with limestone foundation covered in black basalt slabs. The other 3 sides had colossal walls of basalt on limestone. In 1995, the Giza Inspectorate excavated trenches through limestone debris south of the pyramid's southwest corner. They found remains of fieldstone walls running north-northwest, the accretion walls of a supply ramp foundation. According to Zahi Hawass, former Minister of Antiquities, the ramp consisted of 2 walls built from stone rubble mixed with tafla, a calcareous clay. The center was filled with sand and gypsum. It reached approximately 30 meters, 98 feet above the pyramid's base. Roughly 20% of the pyramid's original height of 146.7 meters. The idea traces to Herodotus in the 5th century BCE, 20 centuries after construction, visiting Egypt and writing that 100,000 slaves rotated in 3-month shifts. Herodotus was Greek. Greeks used slaves. When a Greek sees a massive monument, he assumes slaves. The Bible mentions Israelites enslaved in Egypt building store cities. Later readers conflated that with pyramids, even though the biblical timeline does not match pyramid construction by over a millennium. Hollywood cemented the image. Cecil B. DeMille's films, chains, whips, suffering masses, bakeries, breweries, administrative buildings, 4 massive galleries that could house 1,600 to 2,000 workers, possibly 4,000 if the galleries had 2 floors. The excavations, continuing through 2025, revealed a community with organizations so sophisticated it makes modern project management look amateur. Typical village layout, this is where permanent workers lived. The western town behind the Wall of the Crow, a 200-meter-long barrier extending east from the plateau, was planned. Orthogonal street grid, larger houses, Administrative stamps. This housed the elite workers, the skilled craftsmen, the overseers. Between 2013 and 2025, Leonard's team excavated Standing Wall Island, the Royal Administration Building, with sunken silos 2.5 meters in diameter for grain storage, pottery mounds, and sections revealing work organization by district and village networks from across Egypt. Quantities. Several thousand workers eating meat every day, prime cuts from cattle, not scraps. Sheep and goat in quantities that indicate regular slaughter. In the ancient Middle East, daily meat consumption was elite privilege. Peasants ate meat a few times per year at festivals. Workers ate it constantly. The bakeries at Hayt el Ghurab were industrial operations. Excavations revealed modular bakery units replicated across the site. Each unit contained multiple bread baking installations with consistent design. The production capacity far exceeded household needs. These were feeding thousands. Bread came in two forms: hedge, leavened bread that required time to rise, and pesum, flat bread that could be made quickly in large batches. Workers received daily beer rations calculated in measures called des jugs. The beer provided calories, hydration, and made questionable water safer to drink through fermentation. Breweries at Hayt el Ghurab produced massive quantities. Remains of brewing vats and grain processing areas show scale production. This was not village brewing. This was industrial food production for a construction workforce that needed 4,000 to 5,000 calories per day per person for the physical demands of moving multi-ton blocks in desert heat. Animals had to be raised in the Nile Delta, driven overland to Giza, held in pens, slaughtered, butchered, distributed to work crews. Fish had to be caught in the Nile, preserved or delivered fresh, processed. Vegetables, legumes, dates, honey, all required similar supply chains. The papyrus accounting records found at Wadi al-Jarf show this level of detail. Commodities delivered, quantities tracked, distributions recorded. A middle-ranking inspector like Merer kept these records as routine administrative duty. Somewhere in Egypt, higher-level administrators consolidated reports from dozens of inspectors, calculated total requirements, allocated resources, coordinated deliveries. The bureaucracy required to support 20,000 to 30,000 workers for 20 years, building one pyramid, would have employed thousands of scribes, administrators, accountants, logistics coordinators, all using papyrus, ink, and an accounting system sophisticated enough to track resources across an entire nation, social ranking even in death. Hieroglyphic inscriptions on tomb markers detail occupations: stonecutter, mason, transport specialist. Skeletal remains show healed fractures. These workers received medical care, broken bones set properly, infections treated. People do not give medical care to disposable slaves. Painted in red ochre on blocks deep inside where no tourist would ever see. Friends of Khufu, drunkards of Menkor, the pure ones, the enduring ones, teams marking their work with pride. These inscriptions suggest not oppression but team identity, competition between work crews, esprit de corps, exactly what you see in modern construction projects where crews sign their sections. At the top, architects and engineers who understood geometry, astronomy, surveying. Below them, team leaders managing specialized groups, stonecutters, block haulers, ramp builders, mortar makers. Below that, the muscle. But even the laborers were not unskilled. Moving a 2.5-ton block requires knowledge, leverage points, load distribution, team coordination. One mistake, and someone dies. The total workforce estimate has shifted dramatically. Herodotus said 100,000. Modern calculations, based on the Hayt el Ghurab settlement size, the feeding capacity of the bakeries and animal processing areas, and the actual construction timeline, suggest 20,000 to 30,000 workers at peak periods. Not all year. The pyramid was not built by a permanent standing army of laborers. It was built by rotating teams of workers who came during Akhet, the Nile flood season, when farming was impossible and fields sat underwater for 3 to 4 months. Farmers became builders, fulfilled their labor obligation to the state, got fed better than they ate at home, then returned to their fields when the water receded. This was corvée labor, a taxation system where citizens owed the state a certain amount of work time per year. Egypt had no money economy yet. You paid your taxes in grain or labor. Building the pharaoh's pyramid was civic duty mixed with religious obligation. The pharaoh was divine. His pyramid was his stairway to the afterlife. His successful journey to the stars ensured Ma'at, cosmic order, balance. The floods would come. The crops would grow. Egypt would prosper. You were not building a vanity project. You were maintaining the universe. A straight ramp long enough to reach the top at a workable 10% grade would need to be over a mile long and contain more material than the pyramid itself. Impossible. Spiral ramps wrapping around the exterior leave no archaeological trace, and the mathematics do not work for the corners. Internal ramps inside the pyramid structure are possible but unproven. Then in 2014, physicists from the FOM Foundation and the University of Amsterdam published findings in physical review letters that explained something everyone had missed. A wall painting from the tomb of Jehutihotep, An ancient Egyptian noble clearly shows a large statue being transported on a wooden sledge, and critically, a person standing on the front of the sledge pouring water on the sand just in front of it. For years, people assumed this was symbolic or decorative. It was not. The physicists built scaled models and tested it. Wet sand with the correct moisture level between 2 and 5% water content is twice as stiff as dry sand. Capillary bridges form between sand grains when water is added, binding them together. The result? You can have the number of workers needed to pull a loaded sledge. The Egyptians had figured out tribology, the science of friction and lubrication, 4,500 years ago. They did not write equations. They did not have a theory. They just tested it, and it worked. Pour water on the sand in front of the sledge, and suddenly 10 men can do the work that 20 men struggled with. This is empirical engineering. Trial and error refined over generations until you have a technique so effective it gets painted on tomb walls as the standard method. Same time as the Great Pyramid. The ramp had a central slide flanked by staircases with regularly spaced post holes on both sides. The system used ropes threaded through the posts to create a pulley mechanism. Teams on the staircases could pull blocks up the ramp, while teams at the top controlled descent speed. The angle was steep, around 20% grade, much steeper than anyone thought possible for moving multi-ton blocks. But the rope and post system made it work. Organizational knowledge. The surveyors had to ensure the trenches were properly interconnected, so water flowed freely and indicated true level. Then stonemasons had to dress the bedrock to match those marks across an area of over 5 hectares. The precision in the finished foundation proves they succeeded. South side deviates 1 arc minute 57 seconds west. East side deviates 5 arc minutes 30 seconds west. West side deviates 2 arc minutes 30 seconds west. These deviations are minuscule. You can achieve that alignment using circumpolar stars. Watch a star near the celestial pole as it circles the pole overnight. Mark its position at rise, mark its position at set. The midpoint between those two positions is true north. Do this observation multiple nights to refine accuracy. The Egyptians had been observing stars for thousands of years before Khufu. They knew the sky better than we know the night sky today because they watched it every single night with no light pollution and no distractions. Astronomy was not academic, it was practical. Agricultural timing depended on star positions. Religious festivals were timed to celestial events. The pharaoh's journey to the afterlife involved joining specific star groups. Precision in pyramid alignment was not showing off. It was ensuring the pharaoh reached his destination. 2500 BCE. The southern shaft pointed toward Orion's belt, associated with Osiris, god of the afterlife. These were not air shafts, they were star shafts. Symbolic passages for the pharaoh's soul to ascend. The angles are precise, 45 degrees for some, 39 degrees for others, calculated to align with specific stellar targets at specific times. This required sophisticated astronomical observation and geometric calculation to translate celestial positions into pyramid geometry. Drill cores extracted from granite using copper tube drills and the same sand abrasion technique. The tools were simple, but the technique was refined. You do not cut granite with copper. The copper is just the tool holder. The quartz sand is the blade. You pour wet sand mixed with quartz grit into the cut, apply pressure with the copper saw, and the sand grinds through the stone. Slow, labor-intensive, but it works. The evidence is in every cut. If you value this level of documented engineering history, subscribe. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This research comes from verified archaeological sources, including the 2025 study by Halal et al., published in NDT and E-International peer-reviewed journal volume 155, regarding non-destructive testing techniques at the Menkaure Pyramid, the December 2025 study by Landro et al. In PLOS One, analyzing hydraulic systems at the Step Pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, and the ongoing Scan Pyramids project data published by the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities and International Research teams using muon tomography and other non-invasive technologies. Now back to the information. PLOS 1, proposing that the Step Pyramid of Djoser, built roughly 80 years before the Great Pyramid, used a sophisticated hydraulic lift system. The Djoser Pyramid at Saqqara has deep vertical shafts that archaeologists always assumed were symbolic or ceremonial. Landro's team analyzed them as engineering. 2 vertical shafts, one directly under the pyramid and another 200 meters south, connected by a 200-meter tunnel. Both fitted with granite plugs, sealed joints, side chambers. The system could have used floodwater from the Abu Sir Wadi, a seasonal stream collected by the Gisr el Mudir, a massive rectangular stone enclosure previously thought ceremonial, but reinterpreted as a check dam. Water level rises, block floats up. At the top, workers pivoted outward into position. Drain the shaft, repeat. Over 2 million blocks were used. The hypothesis explains the granite plugs, the sealed joints, the flow regulating chambers. These are hydraulic control mechanisms. Similar dam building techniques appear in Egypt's Sad el Kafara Dam from the same period, using an estimated 100,000 cubic meters of rock and rubble. If Djoser's engineers used water power for vertical lift 80 years before Khufu, did Khufu's team refine the technique? We do not know yet. But Marer's papyrus describes the artificial harbor at Giza, a quarter-mile wide basin dredged 30 feet deep. That is massive hydraulic infrastructure. The Egyptians were masters of water management, irrigation canals, flood control, Nilometers to measure water levels, sluice gates. They redirected entire branches of the Nile. A 2020 study published by Emin Gonim and colleagues in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences traced a now dry branch of the Nile, the Khufu branch, that ran right past Giza during the Old Kingdom. This branch, over 60 kilometers long, brought water and transport access directly to the pyramid complex. The Egyptians did not build the pyramids miles from the river and struggle with overland transport. They built them next to active waterways and used boats. Copper saws that needed constant replacement, copper drills for extracting cores from granite. The metal came from Sinai mines across the Red Sea, over 800 kilometers from Giza. The mining operations at Serebit, El Kadim, and Wadi Maghare were seasonal. Teams worked during spring when heat was tolerable and Red Sea conditions allowed safe sailing. Wadi al-Jarf, where Marer's papyrus was found, was one of the critical ports facilitating that supply chain. The harbor had 30 galleries carved into the limestone cliff face, each large enough to store dismantled boats. When the season ended, crews dragged boats up to the rock face, stored them in the galleries, sealed the entrances with massive stone blocks. This protected the vessels from desert conditions during months of inactivity. Come next spring, they unsealed the galleries, reassembled the boats, and sailed back to Sinai. Teams like Marer's worked this circuit for years, delivering copper to Giza, transporting food to Sinai miners, bringing back turquoise for royal workshops. This was not a one-time expedition. This was a state-run supply network operating continuously for decades. Ships had names, crews had ranks, ports had administrators. Every ounce of copper was tracked in papyrus ledgers recording deliveries, destinations, amounts. The boats were made from enormous cedar beams shipped from Lebanon. One boat measured 43.4 meters long, built from over 1,000 pieces of wood fitted together with rope lashings and no metal fasteners. The joinery was so sophisticated that the boat could be disassembled, transported, and reassembled without damage. If they could build boats like that, they could build scaffolding. They could build ramps with timber frames. They could build lifting devices. The organizational complexity dwarfs most modern megaprojects. You need quarries operating continuously. Tura for fine white limestone casing, local Giza, plateau quarries for core blocks, Aswan for granite, 800 kilometers south, transport networks by boat during flood season, overland sledges on lubricated sand, ramps with rope and pulley systems, work crews rotating in shifts, feeding operations, supplying thousands of workers daily, medical facilities treating injuries, administrative oversight tracking supplies, work progress, payroll in grain and goods, priestly oversight ensuring astronomical alignment and ritual purity, security protecting the site and supply routes, storage facilities for tools, rope, food, materials, plus the Queen's pyramids, the causeways, the valley temples, the boat pits, the workers' settlements, the entire Giza necropolis complex built over roughly 100 years during the 4th dynasty. Before that, Sneferu, Khufu's father, built 3 massive pyramids, the Step Pyramid at Meidum, the Bent Pyramid, and the Red Pyramid at Dashur. Between 2686 and 2498 BCE, the Egyptians erected dozens of pyramids and temples across a 60-kilometer stretch of the Nile Valley. This was the Pyramid Age, not a single monument, a century-long program of monumental architecture that mobilized the entire nation's resources. It had bent appearance. Why the change? The original angle was too steep. Structural stress on the internal chambers caused cracking. The engineers recognized the problem mid-construction and adjusted. They did not tear it down. They adapted. Then, Sneferu applied the lesson to the Red Pyramid, built at the safer 43-degree angle from the base. When Khufu commissioned the Great Pyramid, his engineers used 51 degrees, slightly steeper than the Red Pyramid, but more conservative than the initial bent pyramid angle. This is iterative design, experimental architecture. Each pyramid is a prototype informing the next. The Great Pyramid's internal structure includes 5 relieving chambers above the king's chamber, stacked granite slabs separated by air gaps designed to distribute the massive weight of the pyramid above and prevent collapse. Whoever designed that understood load distribution, stress analysis, structural engineering principles that would not be formally articulated for 4,000 years. They had no mathematical equations, no computer models, no stress testing equipment. They had observation, intuition, experience, and the willingness to try solutions and see what worked. They detected 2 air-filled anomalies behind the eastern facade, areas where the limestone shows voids that cannot be explained by natural cracking. One anomaly measures 1.5 meters wide by 1 meter high, 1.35 meters beneath the surface. The second measures 0.9 meters by 0.7 meters, 1.13 meters beneath the surface. These could be structural design features, weight-relieving chambers, or something else. The team cannot determine their full extent yet because the penetration depth of the techniques is limited. They recommend muon tomography for deeper analysis. The corridor is roughly 9 meters long, located above the pyramid's entrance. Its purpose is unknown. Construction feature? Structural support? Hidden passage to undiscovered chambers? The pyramid still holds secrets after 45 centuries of scrutiny. Organized into teams with names and pride, fed well, housed adequately, given medical care, buried with respect, coordinated by royal administrators, supplied by a state-run logistics network spanning Egypt from the Mediterranean to Nubia, using copper tools, wooden sledges, hemp ropes, water lubrication, pulley systems, astronomical observations, geometric calculations, and 4,000 years of accumulated knowledge passed through generations. Of builders, from measuring the Nile's flood for generations and understanding hydrology, from building smaller structures and learning what fails and what stands, from trial and error on a national scale where each pharaoh's pyramid was an experiment in pushing boundaries, than anything attributed to fictional interventions. They moved over 5 million tons of stone without wheels, without iron, without pulleys as we define them. They achieved precision that modern contractors struggle to match, even with laser levels and computer-aided design. They built a structure that stood as the tallest human construction for 3,800 years, until the Lincoln Cathedral spire in 1311 CE. A structure that survives essentially intact, while empires that came after them are dust. Just logistics. Day 24. Inspector Merer spends the day with his team hauling stones with the elite, reporting to the noble Ankaf, director of Roche Khufu. That mundane specificity is what makes it real. This was not mythological. It was work, hard work, skilled work, organized work. Work performed by people whose names we are only now beginning to recover. The workers' cemetery 500 meters west of Hayt el Garab contains thousands of burials. Most have no names, simple workers whose identities are lost. But they were there. They cut the stone, they dragged the blocks, they mixed the mortar, they fitted the casing stones so precisely you cannot slide a razor blade between them. They painted gang names inside the pyramid where no one would see for 4,000 years. They broke bones and had them set. They ate meat and bread and beer. They died and were buried near the monument they built. Centuries. A dead end? Another structural feature? The pyramid is not done revealing itself, but the footprint of the engineering extends beyond the visible pyramid, below ground, around the plateau, across the quarries and harbors and worker settlements. The Great Pyramid was not a single structure. It was the centerpiece of an engineered landscape, the place where earth meets sky, where the mortal touches the eternal, where the pharaoh's soul would ascend to join the imperishable stars circling the north celestial pole. The engineers who built it understood exactly what they were creating, not just a pile of stone, a machine for resurrection, a ladder to the stars, a geometric prayer in limestone that would outlast languages, outlast kingdoms, outlast religions, outlast civilizations. And it did. 45 centuries later, it stands. The casing stones are mostly gone, stripped away by medieval Cairo builders who needed material for mosques and fortifications. The pyramidion cap is missing. The interior chambers were looted in antiquity, but the core remains. 2,300,000 blocks, 6.5 million tons of stone, 146.5 meters tall, reduced to 138.8 meters after losing the outer casing and cap. Still the largest pyramid on Earth. They had stone and water and rope and copper and the Nile flooding every year like clockwork and the stars wheeling overhead in perfect mathematical patterns, and 4,000 years of accumulated knowledge from a civilization that was already ancient when they were born, the first to build at a scale that would not be matched for millennia. And they left records, not in gold-plated hieroglyphs on temple walls, in everyday papyrus logbooks, in gang graffiti inside the pyramid, in tool marks on every block, in the settlements where they lived, in the bones they left behind showing healed fractures and meat-rich diets, in the precision of the structure itself. Everything we got wrong came from one fundamental error. We judged them by what they lacked instead of what they achieved. They lacked wheels, they lacked iron, they lacked modern mathematics, they lacked computers and cranes and trucks and laser levels, and yet they built the Great Pyramid. That is not a mystery, that is competence. The techniques are becoming clear through archaeology and experimental reconstruction. The revelation is who they were: paid workers, organized teams, skilled professionals, Egyptian citizens fulfilling civic and religious duty during flood season, people whose names were Team Great and Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure, people who ate well, received medical care, and were buried with respect. People who left gang marks inside the pyramid not because they were forced to work, but because they were proud of their work. And that makes what they built even more astonishing. When we find them, they will probably be as mundane as Merer's diary. Lists of supplies, reports to supervisors, daily work logs, no grand theories, no mystical revelations, just people doing their jobs. Accomplished with the tools available and the knowledge accumulated and the labor of tens of thousands of Egyptian workers who built a monument that outlasted their language, outlasted their religion, outlasted their entire civilization, and still stands as testimony to what humans can accomplish when organization meets knowledge meets will. Scrolls sat in darkness for 4,500 years, thrown in when the port closed after Khufu died, forgotten, preserved by desert air, until March 2013, when archaeologist Pierre Tallet split the seal and found Inspector Merer's voice speaking across 45 centuries. Day 24, day 25, day 26, hauling stones, reporting to Ankhof, spending nights at Tura North. The horizon of Khufu rising stone by stone,